All right. Thanks for watching or listening today. Here with writer Randy Brown. And he's written a few books that are published. The way I got my copy was through Amazon, and that's the latest book first. And you have 3 other books on there. If you go to the Amazon writers page or authors page, it has all of the books there. I think they're Sunset, Sundown, Sunburst.
Oh, you nailed it. Yeah.
I'll have that link in the show notes too, along with your other social media links. But
yeah, great.
Thanks for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yes.
Yeah, I know you're in Texas. We talked about the weather already. And let's just get into creativity, I guess. Yeah. Or maybe we'll talk about first. That seems like a good idea.
Okay.
So I got the book on Amazon about a month ago, and I just started reading it maybe a week or so. I wanted to finish it before today. I haven't, but I got a trip coming up, and I put it on the Kindle to make it easier to carry around on the plane because it's a sizable book.
It is. Book here, son. Yeah, I'm not accused of being, short with my words, at least in this case.
It's going well. I'm a little over 100 pages in. I think maybe the 3 parts of it, it's maybe around 450 pages for the print copy, and then there's some stuff after it. And when you look at it on the Kindle, though, it's thousands and thousands of pages because that's how the Kindle works.
Right.
Are your other books the same, about the approximate length, or?
The other ones are a little bit shorter. I knew that one was going to be, those first 3 were going to be a series, so I didn't have to try and cram everything all into one book like I did with this. Now, I do have ideas for sequels to this, but the story I wanted to tell in this book was pretty much just self-contained.
Okay. So this one you started off with, it was going to be one big book. I know it's divided into 3 general parts.
Yeah, kind of the 3-act approach is what I usually take in most of my books. The beginning, the downfall, and then the rise up in the last act, the victory.
Right. I like this is a space book, and I like the AI in there and the interaction the people have with their AIs. So
yeah,
that's interesting so far.
Yeah, I kind of felt it was topical. Obviously, that's in the news a lot these days. And when I set out to write this about 2.5 years ago, when I write science fiction, I'm not really a world builder. I'm not going to be the guy who builds, an Isaac Asimov Foundation and Empire type scenario. I'm going to be more of a very near future, something within the next 10 or 15 years, and something that's relatable, I think, to the readers these days. And AI is that part. It's developing fast, and I certainly could see that being very important when you get into space travel.
Yeah, it has some approaches I haven't read before. It made me think about some things I haven't thought about before with a normal space or science fiction book. Would you call this science fiction, or would you call it just fiction?
Yeah, I call it science fiction, heavy on the fiction, light on the science. And I say that because I'm really kind of a lazy researcher when it comes to the science part. That's not my forte, but I see articles or read articles or something that piques my interest. And I had seen something probably about a year before I wrote this book that was talking about space travel using electromagnetic technology. And now I wish I could find that article now. I'd love to read it again, but it kind of sparked some ideas in my head that I took liberties with and incorporated into this book.
Yeah. I don't want to give away any things of the book. People should read it for themselves, but it's enjoyable and it's not difficult to read either. It's not like, it's not a trudge, like when you're reading Moby Dick, it takes a little while to understand everything. Like with Moby Dick, I read a chapter at a time, and then I took notes on it, or took notes while I was writing it, or while I was reading it, so I could look up the things I didn't know. And then you end up with an hour of research just to see that phrase was just a dig at the King of England. And you're like, okay.
Now, did you read the abridged version or the unabridged? Because the unabridged has a bunch of whaling chapters and
Oh yeah,
technical
I
things.
read the
Oh boy.
unabridged. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
that was a slog.
yeah. I like it, and
Hmm.
the good part about reading it and then going back after you understand it is it makes more sense. But you can also, instead of stopping and going, "What's that word mean?" and writing it down to look up later or
Hmm.
looking it up right then, that you can feel the flow of it. And it wasn't, to me, it wasn't the whole book like that, but there
Hmm.
were big parts of it where when I just started reading, I was like, oh, this has got a this has got a flow to it that you wouldn't get if you were just reading it a sentence at a time and trying to understand it.
Oh yeah, kind of like I had that same experience years ago with Donnie's Inferno, and you're trying to figure
Yeah.
out who the people are and what the references are, and it's just you can't continuously read it. It's just it's tough, and if you can take it all in and then go back and reread it in a stream instead of sentence by sentence, it makes it a little bit more enjoyable. It's just a lot of work.
Yeah. I would imagine that's a lot of people's interaction with Shakespeare too, where you
Yeah.
have to,
Oh yeah.
you read it, it sounds good. And then you're like, I wonder what this means. And
Right.
you have to,
Look it up.
watch a Romeo and Juliet with John Leguizamo just to put it
Uh,
in some context.
I don't know. That seems a little extreme.
Oh, it's a good one with the guns. The guns.
Okay.
While I was reading Moby Dick, I was reading The Expanse, and
Oh, yeah.
I started reading that after I think I looked at the first or second show of it,
Mhm.
and so I think that's how it went because the picture in my mind of the people were the people from the TV show, so that's how that
Oh,
affects
yeah.
you when you start reading,
Yep.
and then those books are really thick too, or a lot of pages. And
Mhm.
it was just a set of three when I started reading it. When I stopped reading it, I think there are 9 books. They might have more
Oh,
now,
wow.
but I read the first 3 while I was reading Moby Dick. And you could read a chapter or 2 of Moby Dick. It'd
Mhm.
take an hour or so, and then you could breeze through pages and pages of The Expanse. And you're like, wow, I'm reading a lot and different things really does make you better at reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who'd have thought that?
Imagine that.
Yeah. So, what kind of influences did you have growing up before you were a writer, or even that influenced when you started writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have been a reader all my life, and family legend has it that my grandmother took me to the library to get a library card before I was even in school, and they wouldn't give me one because I hadn't started school yet, and she was not happy. She was a teacher, but I've read my whole life and really quite a variety over the years. I would say this is maybe a little surprising because I don't think it's the name that pops up on everybody's top of their list of favorite writers, but my favorite is Louis L'Amour. And I read a lot of Westerns back in the high
Man.
school days, read all his books several times. And it was mainly just, he told a darn good story. It didn't have to be deep philosophically or anything like that, but it's one of those things where I think that influenced me to my writing to where I don't have to get into the politics or the hidden meanings or anything. People can make their own uh, assertions or thoughts on those things. But I just want to tell a good story. And I think that's kind of probably been my biggest influence over the years. But I read nonfiction, I read biographies, I do read some science fiction, I read detective stories. So, there's a wide variety, even like we've just been talking about some of the classic novels. I love Charles Dickens, and so on. Just readers who tell a good story is what really interests me, and that's what I hope I can do too.
Yeah. Yeah. Louis L'Amour is good because the scene is already set. So it's a
Yes.
shorter book because you
Mhm.
already know the world you live in. I wonder if,
Yeah.
I guess that does influence your feel of world building now, where
Yes.
you like to
Mhm.
start with a common point with a writer or with a reader.
Yeah, yeah. There's a point of entry for them, and what's funny too is my wife recently started. She does more audiobooks than I do, but she recently took up Louis L'Amour and has been listening to him for about the past year. And it's kind of fun to watch her go through these books that I actually remember. I've read some of them in 20 plus years, uh, but hearing her talk about the Sacketts and so on, it's kind of fun to see somebody else go through that journey.
Nice. Do you throw
Yeah.
out the Louis L'Amour quotes every now and then to her and see if she picks up on it?
I try not to irritate her that much.
Oh, okay. Hmm.
No, but we do talk about some storylines, with some of the Sacketts and which one was this? Oh yeah, this guy. Yeah, I still remember some of those.
What kind of writing did you do when did you start writing, and what kind of stuff did you do?
I did mostly probably back in junior high is when I kind of started. It was just some probably like I don't even remember, maybe like some Star Trek stories or something that I would try and write and never got very far with. It wasn't really until I got into to college that I kind of started doing more um, regular writing with short stories and so on, and even took a creative writing class my last semester of school just to round out the hours so I'd have, still be a full-time student. That was probably the first serious attempt at it. And then kind of, I wouldn't say I did a ton of writing back in school, um, fortunately, because you know how that goes. I don't have those stories around anymore, for cringe purposes, thank God. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it wasn't until the 2000s that I really started getting into thinking about writing books.
Is that when did you write that first trilogy?
About, I think I started in like 2011 or so. I had actually started writing a science fiction series before that and never really got very far, never published it. It's one of those things that it's like maybe I should go back and revisit that one day, but I've got too many other ideas coming out right now. And then when I did that first book, Sunset, I was able to publish it on Kindle Direct. That was back before they had print on demand, and so
Mm,
it was pretty easy to format, build my own cover, put it on there. But I never did any promo for it. It was basically just family, friends, anybody who sees it on Facebook. Hey, go take a look at this.
yeah. As I say, I've made tens of dollars writing,
That's about
mainly
right.
mainly
I
from
agree.
me buying my book and my mom.
hmm Yeah, yeah, and first is the first one that I've done professionally published, where I'm doing the marketing and trying to put it out there more, and get more views and readers and so on. Because I have some other books I want to publish too. So this is kind of the start of doing it more than just me uploading something onto Amazon. Not and Amazon's great. I know you've talked about
Yeah.
that in some of your previous episodes. It's a great way to do it and just get stuff out there.
So first came out in October,
Yes.
this October.
Mhm.
What's your experience with working with a publisher versus doing it yourself?
It was a really interesting experience. I loved that they made the cover. They nailed the cover the first time. I gave them some thoughts, and then they sent it back, and I'm like, that's it. So I love that. I love that somebody else did all the formatting for both the ebook and the print version. Um, I love that they distribute it everywhere, and I don't have to worry about any of that back end stuff. Um, there's obviously some things I could probably still do myself. I can format a book and so on, but it's just nice to have somebody else doing it. And then, kind of after the launch, seeing it's interesting because here we are, we're over a month after the release date, about 40 days, and I still don't know how many copies I've sold because Amazon is slow in reporting on so on. But you see trends, so it's kind of interesting to watch that and then see. Hopefully, at some point, those tens of dollars will start rolling in.
Yeah. Well, I just checked, you have 9 reviews on
Yes,
Amazon. That's pretty
yeah,
good for 40 days,
yeah,
especially if
yeah.
it's
Very happy about
9 strangers.
that. Yeah, I'm very happy about that. Yeah, those are
Yeah.
trickling in. I love to see that.
So what were any things with going through a publisher that you didn't expect or
Um, you know, I don't think that there was any real gotchas on this. fortunately, I have a day job, so it's something I'm able to pay for it, because it's not cheap. This time I also did hire a professional editor before I ever got to the point of publishing it, and that was the first time I'd done that. So I consider that as part of the publishing process a little bit, as kind of the preliminary, if you will, of getting the book to that point where then I can publish it with the company. So that was an interesting experience. But yeah, I don't think there was really any surprises. I did try last year. I spent about a month and a half or 2 months giving it a shot to see if I could find an agent. And that didn't go well. So I kind of always felt I'd end up back in the self-publishing world. And I have a sister who writes also, and she has self-published a few books. In fact, she linked me with the editor that I used, and so I got some advice from her along the way too, which is very much appreciated.
What publisher did you use for this then?
It's a company called Book Baby. Yep.
Yeah. So this is a publishing house that you, as the writer, submit all your stuff to, and you, I guess you buy like a package,
Right?
And then they put all the together. Okay.
Yep.
I did that with the first book I did with through iUniverse, and it was okay. And then I found Amazon, and I liked Amazon a lot better. And it does, when somebody else is doing it, it does take away all those little things,
right?
Having to worry about formatting and all that, but they still send it back to you. And then you have to go through the whole manuscript again and make sure, just for your own edification, that the page breaks are right and everything. So you end up reading the book so many times.
Yeah. I probably read this thing a dozen times, and 2 or 3 of those were the proofs that come back. And you're exactly right. I caught something like within the last 10 pages where a paragraph broke and it wasn't supposed to. I'm like, oh my God, I'm glad I read through this again.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how a year from now, what you think about going that route versus Amazon. And I'd never purchased any advertising for it. So for any of the books. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes for you too. Do you get go ahead.
No, I was just going to say about the ads, because they do an ad campaign for you. And I think I did Google ads. Yeah, it was Google ads. They can do Facebook, I think LinkedIn ads as well. But I just did Google ads. And maybe this is the surprising part, although it shouldn't be, just the number of click-throughs you get versus the number of impressions. It's like 0.001% or something like that. It's just some obscenely low number, which could be depressing if you were expecting higher, but I kind of knew it was going to be pretty low.
And the difference there is impression is somebody just sees it on their screen, and then the click through is they actually look at part of it or engage with it.
Yeah, they click on the ad, and then it takes them to, I think it was the Amazon page, was where it delivered them. But yeah, impressions is either it's in an email, in this case, probably on a web page.
Yeah, when I did the first one, and it was on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and some other ones, wherever they published it, then I started looking at those, and I'd look at whatever that type of information was, and I would check it often. And then I started thinking, am I just looking at me looking at this?
Right. Yeah. Are all these my impressions and my click-throughs?
And then I was just like, man, I'm just going to take the higher path and say, I'm not writing for the money. I'm just writing to get the story out there. And then if the money goes, then if it's something you can live on, or even if you had a little bit to where you could, I don't know, buy dinner, that you could say, wow, this is,
that'd be nice.
This amounted to this.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah. I always joke that I'm just happy if somebody comes along and buys the movie rights. That'd be fine with me.
I'm doing writing a script now with another guy, and we talk about it a lot, and then we have to, you have to actually do the work. But I was surprised at how different script writing is versus regular book writing, and it would be worth maybe taking a class for it. But
Mhm.
I think you could also get a lot out of just looking at videos, reading a good book about it, and then practicing. That's what it comes down to, is you have to practice
Mhm.
writing scripts. But it is much simpler because it's just, I thought it was like writing a play, like you would read
Mhm.
in high school when you read Hamlet and it had the people's names by it. And then that's how you knew who was going to talk. And I had thought about just writing a regular book using those dialogue tags like that. So you
Oh,
didn't have
yeah.
to worry about he said, she said, all that. So then I looked at the popular format of script writing, and you have everything centered, and you open a scene with just outside daylight, and then wherever they are, parking lot.
Yep.
Or maybe you reverse that around, parking lot, outside, daylight. And then you do your dialogue, and every now and then a little bit of description of what's going on, but understanding that that's just a suggestion to the director.
Right.
It's like instructions for writing a movie, rather than all the little details of, you got to zoom in on this person's eye. Maybe you favor this person or maybe you don't, but
Mhm.
that's exciting to see how different styles of writing there are. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's funny you
telling the
say
movie
that.
art.
I was just the past couple of weeks, I've been listening to the audiobook of the guys who wrote the movie Airplane. And
Nice,
it's
surely.
hilarious because it's the actual guys doing the audiobook and doing their parts, and they'll have some other people come in and read their parts as well. But to your point, they started off doing live shows and then got to the point of script writing and didn't know, the first thing about it. And somebody gave them a sample script, and they tried to follow that kind of unsuccessfully in the beginning. So it is a whole different world. They're like, this is way different than writing a story or anything else that we've ever done.
Yeah, I'm glad I expanded my world and started reading. The best thing is to read, I found, is to read scripts of either movies you like with the scenes, or
Mm,
read scripts of TV shows. Like if you
yeah.
read some Seinfeld scripts and you're like, wow, I know this show
Hmm.
and I understand what they're doing here. I probably still can't do it very well, but it's it's one of those things you still have to practice at to get better at. But it's
Yeah. I actually take that same idea. I don't write it as a script, but one of my, I guess, tenets of writing and forming a chapter is trying to make it like a scene in a TV show or a scene in a movie. And having in my mind that established setting, like you said, the lighting, smells, those kinds of things, and then kind of blocking the characters, how you want them to go and how you want that conversation to go. That's kind of my go-to method when I get to those, writing a chapter, knowing where it begins and ends and so on. And hopefully having an impact that leads you, further along in the story, obviously too.
yeah. What do you have any methods or ways that you create the personalities of your characters?
Well, some people would probably say some of the main characters are a smartass like me, um, which is, hey, that's fine. Everybody's personality bleeds into it. But I do try, especially like in the book first, the narrator is on a team of 5 people, and you want those people to be different and have some different experiences, life experiences, and so on. So it's, at least for me, and just because I'm not a very accomplished writer, bestseller, or so on, part of it for me is trying to write dialogue that sounds different. And I'm not sure I'm always successful on that, but trying to say this character has different ticks, maybe, or different ways of expressing things that another character doesn't, and make them unique in their voice. That does seem a little tough for me, but I try and put some thought into it. Not always successful, but I try.
Yeah, I've talked about before on here that I use the personalities of not maybe some people I've met,
Hmm.
but also pets. So,
Oh,
or
yeah.
animals that I
Hmm.
know, because you've spent so much time living with them and seeing all those little quirks that you
Hmm.
then, and you know them so well, and
Yeah,
You just
that's a
assign that personality to it.
that's a great idea. We have 2 little dogs who are psychotic, so I could use their personalities in books, I'm
Yep.
sure.
Yep. And you can break it into little pieces, or you can
Mhm,
use the whole thing. And another way is just using or visualizing, similar to how I did with Expanse, where you
mhm.
see the show and then you read the book, and you're Holden is the guy from the show all the time. So that's
Yeah.
just what it's going to be. That you use people that are actors. And I
Mhm.
think that's why when people write scripts, they go, I wrote this script for you. Like, I wrote
Yes,
this
yeah.
script thinking Brad Pitt was going to do this. And you're like,
Mhm.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think too, if you look back at some of the great TV shows, like sitcoms, I always say the best sitcoms, the cast of characters each have their little psychosis. You think back to like a WKRP or a MASH, yeah,
Mm,
Cheers. Everybody has their quirks, and it's you got to do some of those things in your writing too to make your characters unique. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of cardboard cutouts and nobody wants to read it.
yeah. Have you, when you're writing, do you ever get to the point where your character is saying or reacting a way that you didn't expect?
That's actually one of the great things about writing, in my view, because I don't do a real detailed outline. I know kind of where I want to go, but how we get there is in question. And so when you have that character do something or say something that you didn't expect, it's like, oh, this is the fun part of writing right here.
Yeah.
Those are the moments you kind of live for.
Yeah. I think that was advice. I've read a couple books on writing. Stephen King's was one of them. And
Yep.
then Bird by Bird is a good one too. But I don't know if they say it in both of those books or just one, that
Well,
you
I
just
think
take two characters and put them
yeah.
in a room and let them see what they say.
And I think the opposite of that is true too. When a character does something that I don't like, um, part of my philosophy of writing is don't be afraid to throw anything away. Cut
Mm.
out a chunk, and if stuff starts going off the rails, or if I'm bored writing it, then that means you're going to be bored as the reader reading it. So if the character's not doing something I don't like, I'll definitely cut that out and start over again.
There's a poet, I can't remember his name now. Maybe it's Ewan something, uh, maybe a British guy.
Hmm.
Anyway, he has a YouTube video that is, when you start writing and then you start looking at other writers and them talking about writing, and you
Hmm.
get lost in that. But he talked about writing poems, and he's like, yes, I like to write it on paper. And then if I change it, I can see what I've changed, and I just cross through things. He's like, but
Hmm.
always keep the crossing throughs, keep the crossing throughs. That could be the start of something else. So I
Yeah.
look at that for those parts when you take out, especially big parts of things you're writing, and you're like, okay, I'm going to set that aside. It's in your head, so it definitely influences your writing and what
Hmm.
you think about the story. But you can always bring that back or put it in
Right.
somewhere else if you need
Yeah, and
to.
I've done that. That's a great point because I don't ever just delete it and let it fly away into the void. I keep a copy of it, in a non-working folder. But yeah, I have done that where I've gone back and I'm like, I did like this little bit here, or the way somebody said that, and I'll take some bits and pieces out and put them back in. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, you gotta be willing to make those cross outs.
Earlier, you talked about hidden meanings and things, and that you don't
Mhm,
usually write those things in. When you go back and read your book over, or if you hear somebody else
mhm.
talk about it, do you see connections that you didn't see before that you're like, oh, that's
That's interesting. First hasn't been out long enough for me to go back and reread it again. It's probably going to be a couple of years before I do that. After reading
yeah,
it, 12 or 15 times in the space of a year. Um,
yeah.
and I actually do need to go back and reread my earlier books. I'd kind of like to repackage those and get them either onto, a box set type of deal or something like that. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to think if anybody said, "I didn't really understand that," or there was, "Did you mean this?" Um,
Hmm.
I can't think of any examples right off the top of my head with that. I do it all the time when I'm reading, hidden meanings, or did they really mean this, or what's the interpretation of this? But yeah, haven't gotten too many of those questions yet.
I find that when you have a lot of those times where you're writing and the character says something you weren't expecting, or the
Mhm.
story takes a twist that you weren't expecting, that when I go back and read it after, you start to see the connections of those. And I think that's
Mm.
other writer advice is
Mhm.
you write your story, get it out there on the paper or in the computer or whatever, and then you go back, and if you see connections, then you do whatever you need to switch those around, or
Yeah.
to connect them a little better, or have the subtext. So
Mhm. Yeah,
it
it's a great point, and kind of to that same idea. There's a book I'm going to publish next year where I have the main character later in the book has a medical crisis. So to lead up to that, I had to go back and sprinkle in some things in the book, headaches or things along the way, shortness of breath that seemed innocuous at the time you read them. But when you get to that point in the book, then you realize, oh, there was something going on here. He did mean that. So
yeah,
at least in that case, it's a little more deliberate.
I do find myself when I'm looking at a show or reading a book, because of having written and done that very thing where
Mhm.
you have to go back and connect some dots or put some things in, that when somebody says something in a show, you're like, okay, that wasn't there for no reason. That's
Yes. Yeah.
this.
That's going to come back and bite them or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be.
Yes,
Yeah.
because they're talking about alligators and it's going to come back and bite 'em. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it's like
That's
the
going to
Chekhov's
connect.
rifle. If the rifle's hanging over the fireplace, then you darn well better use it at some point during the story if you're going to describe it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. It's interesting, the kind of look behind the curtain of when you actually do the thing and
Mhm.
then you see it. I guess it would be the same with almost any, certainly, pursuit of skill. Like if you're building a
Mhm.
house, you don't know all those things, and then you do it, and somebody says they're going to put a California corner into some framing, and you're like, oh, okay. Well, I know what that is now because I've done that.
Yes.
So, it's-
Yep. Yeah.
hmm. So when you started writing, did you just start writing like short stories, or when
I
you're doing that
did.
science fiction stuff? Or,
Yeah, I did. So back in the 90s, this is me telling how old I am. I did do short stories, and I was a accounting major in college. So, like I said, I took creative writing my last semester just kind of on a lark, and actually did pretty well at it. Got an A, which I think surprised the professor and the other students in the class. And then kind of wrote short stories off and on for over the next decade and so on. And actually, there was a guy who did a little science fiction magazine, self-published. I can't remember. Maybe he was in Ohio or something like that. Anyway, he put out like 3 or 4 issues a year, and I did get a couple of stories in some of those. I think I still have those little chapbooks somewhere. Um,
okay.
up in my closet or something like that. But that was really my first experience with getting published, which I think maybe got me like the sum total of like $12 or something like that, on
Oh,
a
that's
very
pretty
limited
good. A
readership.
success.
Yeah. But yeah, that was kind of the start of it. And when I got to the point of writing Sunset as the first book in my earlier series, it was 2008, 2009, probably when I started, but it was all very uh, evenings, weekends, grabbing moments here and there, and never really anything regular at that point in time, which was tough. I look back and I don't know how I got 3 books out of that, doing it that way.
Hmm. With first, then I guess your approach was different. You had specific time
I
set
did.
aside to do.
Yeah, I did. And this is the method that worked for me. So I always preface stuff like this with this is what works for me. Don't take as advice. Maybe you get something that resonates out of all this, or maybe my life serves as a warning to you on what not to do. But I
Cautionary tale. Yes.
That's right. But back in 2021, about mid-year, I had this idea that had bouncing around in my head for probably a year and a half, and I thought, I'm not going to do it in the evenings. I don't want to sit at the computer for 8 or 9 hours a day and then sit at the computer a couple hours more. So I made the change to start getting up incrementally earlier, to where I finally backed up my um, waking time at 6 o'clock, and then I get in front of the computer by 6:30 and write for about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. And I was able to knock out the first draft of first. Probably took about 2.5 to 3 months doing it that way. So
Wow.
it was a
Okay.
change, but it was I wasn't going to do it any other way. I didn't feel like it was going to happen.
That's what they say. You just have to show up.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
did you do more of it based on amount of time to write, or did you have like a word count you were trying to do per
Uh,
day?
just really trying to get the story. I didn't really worry about word count too much, as you can tell, on how big the book is. And actually, after I had the consulting editor go through it, I actually added probably 2,000 or 3,000 more words to
Hmm.
help out some of the story later in the book, and so on. So my goal really was to sit down every morning, bang out um, the thoughts in my head, and get to a place by 7:45 a.m. where I know what I want to keep doing, so that I have a starting point the next day. That's really the kind of way it went.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of program do you use for writing?
Uh, I used to use Scrivener in my first 3 books a little bit, but I've since gone back to, and it was very useful, very good for moving stuff around. But now I just use the old tried and true Microsoft Word, and then that way there's no distractions on formatting or the program that doesn't do what I'm not expecting it to do. So I just pound away at the keyboard in Word. Not glamorous.
I like Word. It's simple,
It
and
is. Yeah.
for all those reasons you just said, the less distractions.
Yeah.
I've looked at Scrivener. I've never used it to write a whole lot of stuff. And then Dabble, I used to do a collaboration with another guy, and that made it easy because you could see what they did and
Mhm.
the changes were real time. I
Interesting.
think that was when that was in their beta.
Mhm.
He had to call to get that program, like us, to be able to get into it. But that was a couple of years ago, so I'm
Yeah.
sure that's out there now for
Out
everyone.
and about. Yeah, when I did some writing, I mentioned those books that I wrote and didn't publish or anything, but I actually did those longhand. I just had notebooks where I would sit and write that, in the doctor's office or at lunch or something like that. And I justified it by saying, well, I'll type this up, but the typing and putting it into a word processor is going to be my first edit. But I look back on that and think, wow, that's crazy. I don't think I could do that now.
Well, Thomas Wolfe, I think, did longhand,
Hmm.
and his writing is so much bigger than the size we write now. Like, it's
Hmm.
across the paper. His letters were an inch or so at least. Yeah, more than an inch tall.
Yeah.
And he wrote it on top of a refrigerator because he's a tall dude. So he'd stand there and write longhand,
Wow.
and then he'd have this stack of papers, and his editor would have to go back and, oh goodness, I can't
I,
imagine, because it
I
was in
yeah.
cursive too. So
Oh my gosh. Well, I think that kind of proves the rule of do whatever works for you. You know,
yeah,
that's his method's obviously not going to work for me. I'm too short to see the top of the refrigerator. So, and my cursive
he
sucks.
he was a wordy writer too, though.
Yeah.
But that's, you can get the versions of his books that are like You Can't Go Home Again, or
Hmm.
something with an angel, that you can get the abridged or the shortened one, the edited
Hmm.
version, and then you can get it, all of it, and you're like, wow, that's a lot.
That's a
It's a
lot of
lot of
writing.
words, man. It's a lot of words. You just, you're chapters into it and you're still in the first scene, and you're like, oh
Hmm.
goodness. I mean, it's good to read, but wow.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I try, and keep things moving in the books that I write. Like I said, if I'm bored reading it, and I've gotten to that point where I'm 3 chapters down a path, and I'm like, yeah, I'm bored. Let's
Yeah.
change this up.
I like the way first is set up. I haven't read the other ones, but I like the way first is, with the chapters aren't really ridiculously long. And sometimes you have a few page chapters, sometimes it's a little more, but
Yep.
you can read it in a sitting pretty easy. And I think that lends itself to an e-reader because you
Hmm.
can see progress. I mean, you're not
Right.
going to, when you open it up and it says 4,000 some pages, and you're like, oh gosh. But when you go, oh, I got this chapter done, I got this chapter done, I got
Yeah.
this chapter done, then it progresses, and it's not something that you look at and go, I don't want to get in that right now. I want to have a time set aside for it. But I read it a chapter at a time when I read it. So it's been going well.
Yeah, I try and keep that happy medium. There's books where, like, James Patterson's a great example of this, where his chapters are 2 to 4 or 5 pages. They're like snack sized, and
Hmm.
the the goal obviously is to keep you going from chapter to chapter and read a lot in one setting. That's too short for me. But again, I also don't want to write a 40-page chapter and make you take 3 sittings to read it. So somewhere in there, just enough to cover the scene is what I shoot for. And
Yeah.
thanks. Hopefully it works.
Yeah. It's good. It's going well. And the size of the book is nice. I like this size you chose.
Yeah.
Because you can still hold it in one hand. The paper is good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I did those first 3 books on Kindle, it was pretty cool to see them on this Kindle screen and everything. But when Amazon added their print on demand, I don't know, what was that, like 2015, 2016, maybe? Um,
Oh, okay.
I formatted them so that you could get them in print. And it was, as you know, it's just cool to hold a book in your hands that you wrote and say, wow, this looks pretty good, actually.
Yeah. I didn't, like I said, the first book I did was through a publishing house, a
Mhm.
self-publishing house. And that was in 2014. And I didn't know
Mhm.
about the Amazon. I mean, I knew about Amazon then, but I didn't know,
Mhm.
I didn't use any of their stuff like that. And then I got a Kindle just to do regular reading on.
Right.
And I started looking at the self-publishing stuff they had. And it's probably, yeah, probably around 15 or 16. So I must have got in right when they started doing
Mhm.
the print thing. Cause I've only
Yeah.
known it as they had soft cover. And then they now just added not too long ago, the hardcover option.
Oh,
And
okay. I didn't even know they'd done that. So that's cool.
yeah, they were talking about that back when I started the soft cover,
Mhm.
and it gives you that insight into, wow, look at all the things that go into building a book and doing the
Yes.
page breaks and then having to go through it every time you make the change. Although it is nice on Amazon where you can, if you see something wrong, you can just go, okay, I'm going to change it and
Yeah.
then re-upload it.
Re-upload it,
But
and it
then,
just goes like that. Yeah.
yeah, and then you have to go through it all again just for your own clarity or
Right.
for just to make sure that everything is
Mhm.
still lined up correctly.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people get into I just want to get it published. So they put it on there, they correct a few mistakes, leave a lot more, and then they just publish it like that and don't go back and fix it. I'm not saying you need to go back and fix it like,
Yeah.
ET, you can take the guns out of the hands and put flashlights in. But if you see a bunch of problems, then fix the problems.
Uh, Totally agree. I do a lot of reading on my Kindle Paperwhite and Kindle Unlimited, and the series I've read through several series that I probably would have never picked up in a bookstore, uh, but they're part of the Kindle Unlimited package. It might be a 9-book series. It's interesting. I just get into it and read through them, but there's been a couple I've started where, like you said, the writing, there was a bunch of mistakes in it, and it's just distracting. And
Yeah.
I'll get a 30 minutes into it, and I'll say to myself, I'm not going to do this. I'm not doing this for several books.
Yeah.
So,
If it's somebody you would do it.
mhm,
Like I go to a writing group and then every now and then somebody has a book that they've written
mhm,
and usually it's on Amazon. I've had a few where they would hand you a copy, but I would just order it on Amazon. And then you start reading some of them really great. Other ones you're like, oh, this is painful. This is
yes.
painful. And you start writing notes in the margin and
Mhm,
then you give them the book and just go, hey, I finished it. I like the story. Here's some thoughts. If you want to see it or
yes.
not, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Do,
Yeah.
when you write, do you have a person like I think it was in, I can't remember what writing book it's on, but do you
Mm,
have an ideal reader in mind, or are you thinking about a reader, or do you have people? This is a lot of questions in
mhm,
one. And do you
yes.
have people that read your draft and like when it gets to a point where you're 3 or 4 drafts into it to give you some feedback on it?
It's interesting. I don't think I really have like an ideal reader in mind. I just kind of throw it out there to hopefully whoever likes it. Um, I do have my wife read the drafts as I go along, and she's an unreliable feedback person. Let's just be clear. She's my
Oh
wife.
goodness, that's a shot.
So she's always going to say nice things, or that she's liking it or so on.
Oh,
And
okay.
and which is fine, but I'm also not. I know I'm not going to get a really double-edged critique of what I can fix or do
Mm.
better on this. I It does bring back a memory of when I did Sunset and published that. What was it, 2012 or whatever the case may be. I gave her a copy to read when we were on a vacation. So kids are in the back doing their thing of the van, and she's reading it. And the story's a little dark. It's about a guy whose daughter is murdered, kidnapped and murdered, and then he has to go into the underworld of southern New Mexico, El Paso, Mexico, and so on to find the killers. But he has to start kidnapping people himself to get into that group. And
Sounds
my
right.
wife, my wife got a couple pages into the book and realized what was going on, and she slammed the book or laptop shut and turned to me and she goes, "Don't you ever do that? Don't you ever do anything like that?" I'm like, "It's just a book. It's fiction." So that's her kind of feedback.
It's
But
writing research. I had to go
yes,
kidnap some people.
that's right. But yeah, I kind of tend to write. I've belonged to writers groups before. I belonged to critique groups, which were very useful back in the day. But like I said, this time I used a professional consulting editor, and she came up with a couple of really big things that needed to change, but lots of little things that were really good feedback. So that was really tended to be my feedback on this one. And I learned a lot, so that I've got two other books that I'm ready to publish, but I'm spacing them out a little bit, that I learned from the critique or the editing she gave me, and can apply that to these other books too, and keep some of those things in mind.
So besides your wife and the other editor, you don't
Mhm.
have a group of people that you send out a draft to and say, "Let me know your thoughts on this."
I send it to my sisters, and my parents, and
Okay. Yeah.
again, unreliable critiquers, if you will, whether they read
Oh,
them or not. But yeah, I don't expect a whole lot of uh, red lines or anything like that when I send it out to them.
oh, they don't. Do they write notes on it and send it back, or do they just?
My
Oh,
dad he'll text me when he finds a typo or something like that. Page 86, second paragraph.
nice.
You left out a word. Like, oh,
Oh
thanks, Dad.
goodness.
But what'd you think of the story?
I think there's a spelling error. Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. Well.
Oh man, that's one of the parts about writing that I found kept me going was
Mhm.
you're writing this thing and you're like, somebody's going to read it and it's not just going to be a stranger. So, like, my mom's going to read it. Hopefully, at
Right.
least my wife will read it. And then I got
Mhm.
some other people, friends I know that I'll send it to and see what they think. Because if there's a
Mhm.
big thing they don't understand, then I'd like to know that.
Yeah.
And I guess my friends are more brutal than your family. But
Sounds like it.
yeah, it's I really look forward to seeing the comments and reading them because I'll usually send out a hard copy or either email it to them and they'll email back a copy that's marked up, and
Mhm.
that keeps me going because I'm like, I
Yeah.
want to get to this point, I want to send it out, I want to get it back, and if I get that from someone else, then I know how important it is to me, so I'm
Mhm.
on it immediately, and I'll take off from work if I have to uh, to go through it in a timely
Mhm.
manner and send it back to
Nice.
them. But
Yeah. When I belonged to critique groups, it was usually people writing short stories, or they would post a chapter of their novel. And if I
mm,
remember right, you had to do 5 critiques before you could get one of your own
oh
critique.
wow,
And this has been a while back. Um, but the best ones I ever got were the ones that they just flamed me, kind
yeah.
of I can't believe you're even trying to write kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't it for me, that didn't make me want to write less.
Yes.
It just I would look at it and go, "Well, okay, they understood the point at least,
Hmm.
and they just didn't like it." Some people just aren't gonna like it, but,
Right.
I mean, take the take the things that you think are good, don't change your whole idea because of
Hmm.
what some person says, even if it was
Right.
everybody saying it. If you put
Yes.
it together and you like it, somebody else is gonna like it. You just need to find that person that's gonna like it.
Right. Yeah. And I think that goes back to your question about the ideal reader. I don't know that I have one, like I said. Um, but hopefully somebody likes some of the ideas or things I'm throwing out there enough to connect and read the book and, you know, give a
Maybe
nice
what
review
I
on Amazon.
when I think about an ideal reader, I just think of it as I know the personality of the person that's going to read it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm writing, sometimes I'll go, is this person going to understand what I mean here? Or
Right.
it'll be interesting to see if they put this together. And
Hmm.
I'm surprised by people. You can tell the ones that actually read it and are serious about it versus the cursory read or the obligatory
Right.
read. And then you're like, well, I'm going to take them off my list of people to send it to because you don't want to bother them. It is
Mhm.
a, a demand on time to read somebody's stuff, but
It is, it is. And I know I said my wife was unreliable, but, for marital bliss, let me say she's actually also found several good things along the way. Something that I had in the book that she's like, "Well, you said something different earlier in the book, so you're contradicting yourself."
yeah,
So she's found some
that's what you're
stuff
looking
like
for.
that, but she's also not gonna, give me just a one-star review and tell me how much she hates the book.
Yeah, I would hope not. Yeah, I didn't take it as unreliable. I took unreliable as meaning after you explained it, she was a little
Yeah.
biased, which I would
Yes,
expect.
exactly. Yeah.
So
I
that's
You would
okay.
hope, right?
Yeah, but she also doesn't want you to put out something that's going to be not
Mhm.
understood by everyone. So that's
Yeah.
good. If you have that type of person that you're writing with them in mind
Mhm.
when you're writing, and then to
Right.
see their critique of it or their ideas on it, it
Mhm.
I like that. It makes a
Yeah.
difference.
It does. It does.
Those writing groups or the critique groups, I usually try to keep it. If I ever put anything in there, it's because I'm trying something different, like with
Mm.
dialogue tags, or it's
Right.
a weird scene that is, I'm not sure if people will understand it. So
Mhm.
then those are strangers. Those are people that I don't really know. But if I've been to the
Mhm.
group enough, then I have an idea of what they're going to say. So that's why when you give them something to read or you read something at the group, I try to keep it 300 words or less, so
Right.
little. And you can consider the source because this person says this about everybody's stuff. And you go, oh,
Yeah.
okay. And
It's
usually when they're talking about specific things over and over again with everybody's thing, that's something they're insecure about in their own writing, or maybe not insecure, but thinking about in their writing. That's
right.
why I think it's useful to go to those writing groups because when you give people feedback, you can see, oh, I'm giving them the same feedback I give all the time. And it's about these things that I worry about. So
Right.
it's, they're
Yeah.
worth
Yeah.
it, but they can be annoying.
Yes. Well, and I belonged to a writers group when we lived in Oklahoma, about 20 years ago, and it was very useful. But I'm curious because I know you've been writing poetry. Do you have people critique your poetry, or do you feel like that's, excuse me, a little bit beyond the scope of a critique group like that?
I've taken poetry into that critique group before, and
Mhm.
it's a science fiction reading group. So it was a
Mhm.
science fiction-y type poem about
Okay.
us living in a simulation. Is if we're in a
Mhm.
simulation and we knew it, what could we do about it? Doesn't really matter if you know.
Mhm.
Does it mean you live your life differently? But my poetry is probably weirder on the weirder side.
Okay.
So
Does it
when I
connect with them, or do they connect with it, or are they more, along the prose novel, short story lines?
Yeah, I don't know if they were just being nice or if they were confused, because
Mm.
often that looks the same. So maybe
Yeah,
maybe it's a little of both of those. But I
interesting. Yeah.
poetry lately is what I've been writing the most of. So the
Mm.
last 3 years, a poetry book a year, and the first one goes back to when I started writing. And I think the first poem was some high school or middle school sometime. And
Mhm.
while all the things you've ever written are not in that book, it's a timeline of it. And I put it together with the idea that if somebody was going to be a poet, and I'm not saying I'm a great poet, but I like it. So maybe some other
Mhm.
people will. But
Cool.
just seeing the growth of writing from middle school to maybe 3 or 4 years ago
Mhm.
that time span covered. I think it's interesting. I'd read other poets that have a time of 20 years of poetry just because you can go, wow, it really, you can tell what this person is going through at this time in their
Yeah.
life. And
Right. Interesting.
it's, I do like, have you written poetry?
No, that's kind of a black box to me. I just don't
Hmm.
have that feel for that kind of writing, I guess you would say. I enjoy some, um, but it's not something I just seek out and pick up a lot of poetry. So to me, it's kind of one of those. Um, I it's a lofty goal, and I don't think I can get to that type of goal. It seems
I
hard to
think
me.
it's like that script writing thing where it's just a
Mhm.
different type of writing, whether you're
Mhm.
writing
Yeah.
fiction or nonfiction and poetry, or if you're trying to do poetry that's rhyming. And
Right.
I do a little bit of rhyming, but that's what my wife likes. So when she
Mm.
reads stuff that's free verse, she's
Mhm.
like, this is weird. How come you can't just write a poem that rhymes? And it's, I think it's worth doing. It's something
Mhm.
that I think, as far as writing goes, comes from somewhere else,
Mm.
especially poetry, because it's
Right.
just so, like, you write if you're going about your normal day and a thought pops into your mind and you take a note of that, whether it's on
Mhm.
paper or in your phone or whatever. And then later on, you have another thought and you write that down there. Those might be part of the same poem, or they might be different ones. And you might not
Right.
even use them in a poem. You might put them in dialogue in a story of,
Mhm.
you just start with this person says this.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good exercise to try, because
Mhm.
in in part it's easier than writing a book because it's quicker. So you can say, I wrote this poem, and how do you know how long a poem is supposed to be? I don't know. You just write it and then see what you
And
think,
it's done.
and
Yeah.
then
Your
come
thoughts, yeah.
back later. Or you can approach it with an idea of, here's the topic I want to talk about. Let me write a poem about it. And then it might mean something else. And it could
Right.
mean something
Yeah.
totally different to someone else. I think that's
Mhm.
why poetry has that quick little interaction where it can be interpreted in so many different ways. And that's why I don't explain a lot of what poetry means to me,
Right.
whether it's something someone else wrote or something I wrote, because I don't want to mess up someone else's view of it. Like
Right.
the the road less traveled.
Mhm.
I always thought, even reading it in high school or before, I thought it didn't make a difference what path you took. They're both the same. It says it in the poem. Both the paths are same.
Mhm.
And then you go through all these things and you hear people talking about, oh, it's about taking this road less traveled. And it's like, no, that's not what that poem's about. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but that's
Right.
not what that
It's
poem's about.
interpretation. Yeah.
And then years later, I read a book that explained from the writer of how he used to go on walks with his
Mm.
other poet friends, and it didn't matter which path they took, they still talked about the same stuff and ended up in the same place and did the same things. And it was really just an inside joke to another poet. And you're like, oh,
Mhm.
yeah, that makes sense. Now, that doesn't change what it means to other people in the world, but I mean, it's what I thought it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, it kind of relates back to song lyrics too. Songs can mean something to one person, and you can find out that the person who wrote the song. One example of one of my favorite bands comes to mind where the writer's writing about, "You almost gave me a murder or a heart attack," and it sounds like a love song, but in reality, he wrote it because his cat got out the window and was
mm,
gone for several days, and gave him, felt like a murder or heart attack, and then the cat
yeah,
came back.
wow.
But there's different ways you can interpret it, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of songs are about animals, and a lot of books and
Probably
poetry are
so.
about animals.
Probably more than we
Just
know.
Just last night, I was listening to the acoustic version of Mr. Jones by the Counting Crows,
Oh yeah.
and not Mr. Jones, the one about it's a long December or something. One of the
Oh
Counting
yeah.
Crows songs. I listened to a few of them, but then I started thinking about my Chihuahua that died in April, and I was like, oh, this song is about Tinker. This is absolutely about Tinker. This whole thing about her walking on the beach where the water and the sand meets, like she's walking on a tightrope in a circus. Oh, that's Tinker. That's Tinker. And then she gets to the house
Right.
and takes all her clothes off and says she's close to understanding Jesus. Hey, that's Tinker. When we got home, she take her collar off. She's naked outside. Yeah, I got it. That song's about a Chihuahua to me. Now,
That's
it's definitely
hilarious.
something different to the Counting Crows guy, but
Yeah.
I like that it can
Unless you would
take
spend
on
time with your
life.
dog.
Yeah, I like that it takes on life for other people, like a different
Mhm.
meaning.
In
So,
different
what do
ways,
you
yeah.
think? Where do you think then that ideas come from?
That's a good question. In my experience, they come from a bunch of different places. So, uh, for example, first was an idea of I just thought of what would it be like for one guy to be out there, the first person to ever see the light of another star, and he's all by himself. And there's billions of people 4+ light years away, but he's there by himself, and that's kind of the start of that idea. Um, the the other book that I'm going to read or publish early next year, um, the idea came to me after coming back from Ireland and being jet lagged. And that woke me up at 3:30 in the morning, and boom, I just had this idea and wrote the book. So I get ideas from who knows where, anywhere, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's the regular, you can just have an idea through your experiences and they get mixed up in your mind and then it comes out.
Mhm.
And then I think there's somewhere else that ideas come from. Like, and I've talked about it before, like the Romans talked
Mhm.
about genius and how genius is not how we use it today, where it's saying that person is genius. Look at
Mhm.
this music they wrote or this art they did, that it's something outside of you that is
Mhm.
informing you, that you're operating kind of as a conduit for it. And I feel that more about poetry than I do about
Mm.
writing books. But writing books, especially if you're collaborating with someone else and you're talking about the story, that's exciting too. I mean,
Right.
that idea is a mix of two people's ideas from wherever those ideas came from, life experience or whatever. So yeah, I agree there. It comes
Yeah.
from different places. I think that's why different writing is worth doing.
Right. And you have talked about this in some of your previous episodes too, so I don't want to hammer too long on it, but I think you talked a little bit about running or doing things that are totally different, and
Mhm.
your mind detaches from whatever writing or story you were thinking about, and it goes back to your subconscious. I've had so many times being out on a run and just listening to music with no words and not even thinking about the book, and then boom, all of a sudden this thought comes in that it either resolves a problem I had with the book I was writing, or it gives me a fresh take, that little pizzazz that I felt like I was missing, all those things. But I need to go for more runs, I guess is what I'm saying, because it seems to
Yeah,
happen at those points.
it's exciting, and that's when you don't know, or at least I don't know, is that because my subconscious is working on it? Is that
Right.
because there's something else also in the reality or world that's also working on it? That's like, oh, here's a note on this story. What do you think about this?
Yeah.
Or if it's just the luck of hearing music in a certain way, because I think music is definitely connected to
Hmm.
creativity, and
Oh, absolutely.
then
Yeah.
running. Yeah, running is great. Exercise is great. Although I think
Hmm.
like weightlifting and things, you're putting your mind and your body in a stress
Right.
also with running. But I think you have to think a
Mhm.
little more when you're doing that. At least I do.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
if you have that exercise that is that rhythmic, maybe you can just check out and let that other part of your dolphin brain worry about running while this other part's doing this other thing. And then
Yeah.
maybe you're not thinking about either. That
Yeah, exactly.
that is a reason to go run.
It is. I do it after work because it's kind of that break between work and whatever else I'm going to do the rest of the day, and it's that
Yeah.
clearing your mind thing. But that's also seems to be sometimes when lightning strikes with inspiration or whatever else you want to call it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I wonder if that's why also like you can wake up from a dream or you have a
Mhm.
dream or whatever, and you just have an idea there that
Yeah.
produces itself. And also I found swimming is good
Mm.
and water in general. So if when you're in the
Mm.
shower, that's when you have
Mhm.
a lot of great ideas, you know, you're like, oh,
Yeah, that
so
has
now you
happened
gotta,
too.
yeah, you got to write that down before you forget it. Like
Exactly. Yeah, that's my problem.
we talked before we started recording about running, and I understand you have a running blog
Yep.
that is not like a running blog, like it's still going, but a running blog, a blog about running that is also still going.
Yes.
But
Yeah, I started that when I might have started it when I started training for my first marathon, maybe, because I ran for a couple of years trying to build up mileage and did all the usual mistakes of running too fast, hurting my knees, and those kinds of things. So it took a while, but it's kind of just my way of logging each run, but then being able to go back and see what I was doing at a particular time, and as the years go by, everything starts to blend together anyway. And I think back, well, what year was it? I did 4 marathons in 1 year. That was stupid. What was I thinking? And then go back and find that year and realize, yeah, that was stupid. So it's the receipts on all my runs over the years.
have you gotten the plantar fasciitis yet?
I had it. I did. I had it probably 7 or 8 years ago. The
Mm.
only injuries I've ever had running are when I change shoes, and it's we talked about the runner's magazine, and they'll come along with something like in this case, try these new shoes. Minimal is the way to go. It drops
Mm.
the heel drop is lower. It's more natural for you. So I tried that and got plantar fasciitis, and it took
Oh, you got
about
to ease into that. Yeah.
yeah, it took about a year and a half to finally get rid of it. That was not fun.
Yeah. I had that because I was running probably 7 miles, 5 to 7 miles a day, and then one day a
Mhm.
week of doing 10 to 15 and no days off. But I
Oh
was
yeah.
using just a regular Asics
Mhm.
stability shoe, which
Yep.
I like Asics. And
Yep. That's what I wear.
yeah. And then I got like you read all the articles about it and you hear people talk about the morning heel pain and all that. And you're like,
Yeah.
that's not, that can't be that bad, but it's terrible. It's terrible.
Oh, it is
I ended up
horrible.
getting surgery on one foot where
Oh,
they
wow.
go in, they don't do an incision.
Mhm.
The doctor explained it as we stab the bottom of your heel. I was like, oh, okay, this is good. We stab, and then we put in this little jet that shoots salt or a saline
Oh,
solution at the
okay.
area between your fascia and your heel
Mhm.
because it's so much scar tissue built up in there
Oh
that
my
it
gosh.
debrides it, and
Mhm.
then that's how they. So I mean, it worked. I haven't had a
I
problem
was
with
gonna
it since
say, I
then.
hope it worked.
Yeah. And it's
Wow.
been probably 4 or 5 years ago. And every now and then the other foot, you start to feel it. You get that little pain right in the center of
Mhm.
your heel. And I think that's why cumulative pain is so bad, whether
It is, yeah.
it's mental or it's physical. You get
Mhm.
to the point where you have the hint of it and you remember how bad it was. You're just like, oh,
Yeah.
this is terrible. But I've
Yeah.
gone through from wearing Asics now, I wear the barefoot shoe, which is
Oh, yeah.
it's barefoot is the brand.
Mhm.
And between that was the MBTs. That's Mike Bravo Tango, the Swiss shoe that has
Oh,
the
yeah.
like it's kind of like the K Swiss, but it's
Mhm.
I find it better that it encourages a midfoot strike. So you have to go
Yep.
from striking with your heel, which is what I did all the
Yeah.
time before I had it, to a midfoot strike And then with the barefoot shoe, you're definitely thinking lighter, but I'm
Okay.
not running the distances that I used to. The
Mm.
barefoot shoe, it takes a long time to build up to that. And you could use just like a minimal flip flop and probably get to that point
Oh,
as
wow.
well. But
Yeah.
I mix those in like a Merrill, a barefoot, and an
Mhm.
MBT. And then when you start to look at shoes as a cast for your foot and
Mhm.
you feel that heel pain or that sole pain coming in, then you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to put this softer shoe on for a little while
Oh, yeah.
and just I like having the ability to switch between them. But barefoot
Mhm.
running, no shoe at all, I do a lot now.
Oh, wow.
Barefoot running and just running with a sock on. And the treadmill is the Air Runner,
Mhm.
which is expensive, the most expensive treadmill I've ever purchased, but the best I've ever purchased because you don't have to mess with an incline or do a speed. You're the one making it turn, and it's not like the
Mhm.
one that was in the locker room when we were in high school.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
one that actually works, that you could
Mhm.
run as fast as you wanted to, or you could just walk on it. And
Wow.
that one's great because there's a little bit of flexibility in it too. Do you still
That's
put the
cool.
miles in every day?
I run probably 3 or 4 times a week right now. I'm not training for anything, and I went through a couple of years of minor nagging injuries and laziness, mostly laziness.
Mhm.
That I'm working on building the mileage back up. I'd like to get back to like doing a half marathon maybe next spring. I don't know if I'll ever do a marathon again because that's just a beat down and it's a big commitment of time. But we'll see. It used to be probably 35 to 40 miles a week when you're training for a marathon. Right
Mhm.
now, I'm probably in the 15 to 20 range. So
That's
just
not
trying to
bad.
keep, yeah, trying to keep some level of fitness up, and like I said, hopefully getting some of those flashes of inspiration when I'm out there too.
Yeah. That'd be the main reason I would run now
Yes.
is just to clear your mind and
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I gotta
I
have it.
think I worry more now about safety running outside than I did
Mhm.
10 or 20 years ago. Like I would just
Right.
go run at 2 o'clock in the morning outside and not think of it.
Oh yeah.
And that was in Virginia Beach, which I
Mhm.
felt pretty safe. But out
Yeah.
here, like in Florida now, you could probably do it. I'd worry a little bit about wild animals just because
Yeah.
they could be out there.
I've seen a couple of bobcats out before. I had a dog charge at me a couple of weeks ago from a
Yeah.
house I was running by. So, it's always out there. I tend to run the same path for the most part. So I've got familiar with it and know where the bad parts could be if there are any.
Yeah. It's definitely something worth doing. Even if you go
Yeah.
out and just walk around, you can probably get that same
Yeah.
inspiration from a regular walk too. But
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Because in Texas summers, I don't run as much. It's just impossible to try and go pound out 7 or 8 miles when it's 110 degrees outside. So I build in walking more. It's actually more walking than running in those situations. Just trying to keep up a level of fitness, but again, got to have that time with my mind going blank and doing something physical as opposed to the day job or whatever else is going on.
yeah, I can't think of a time where I went for a run or did a workout or swam or anything like that and thought afterwards, I wish I didn't do that.
That I've had the exact same thought, and it's probably somewhere on my running blog of I I never regret the runs I take, but I do regret the ones I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've experienced this too. You feel like crap. You feel like I don't want to do this. I just want to sit down and do nothing. But instead, you force yourself to go run, and when you get done and you come back, you're like, that was totally worth it. I'm so glad I did that.
Yeah. It puts into that perspective of the Rocky, running
Hmm.
up the steps.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
you're like, yeah, okay. I feel like that after some runs. That's
yeah.
good. It's got to be good for your mind.
That's right.
Mm. And then even if you run outside and it's bad weather, whether it's cold or hot or
Mhm.
raining, and then after you're done with that, you kind of feel like a little bit better of a human too. You're like, yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
did. That's
I
what I,
can I can do this. Well, I
yeah.
actually enjoy running in the rain. If it's not lightning, I love to go running in the rain.
I've run in some thunderstorms before, and while I was doing it, I was like, "This is a terrible idea." But after it's
Yep.
over, you're like, "Yeah, that was pretty bad. That was pretty bad." That
Yeah, yeah.
was
Well, I skirted death
mm,
on this one.
yeah. I wouldn't do it now, I don't think, but
No.
maybe I'd duck in somewhere and get a drink.
Yeah,
But
I've done that
it's
before.
have you ever hit the wall running? Like they have it in all those running magazines,
Oh,
but
yeah. I don't
yeah,
think unless you're an elite world-class runner that you can run a marathon without hitting the wall and figuring out where that is, how it feels like, and then getting past it. Um, and my wall tends to be I get calf cramps later on in the race. So I was doing a race in Tulsa several years back and hit that point where I couldn't run anymore because my I could walk, but I couldn't run because of the calf cramps. So I actually walked like the last 6.2 miles. It happened around
mm,
mile 20, but I'm like, I'm still going to finish this. And then I did one in Fort Worth a couple of years ago where I walked probably the last 2 miles because of that. So to me, that's my wall. But I know too the mental piece of it is the part where you get to where your body is just depleted all its fuel, and you still got to keep going because you want to finish. And
yeah,
that's the big mental part of it that you have to get through. And you can't really get that in the training. You have to do it in the race.
yeah. The thing that changed running for me was being able to listen to music while I ran.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
having the iPod, I think is early 2000s
Yeah.
or
Yeah. I built
mid
the
2010s.
marathon playlist.
Yeah, where I would listen to music and I was like, "Oh, okay." And it changed my relationship with running from a
Mhm.
chore and boring to that thing where you can clear your mind and
Right.
because you don't always listen to the music when you're running.
Right.
If you're lucky, the music drowns out and
Hmm.
you're gone. But
Right.
I think it helps you get into that state of clarity or whatever it could be called.
Hmm. I
But
agree. I
when
agree. Yeah.
in Virginia Beach, I had been running about 5 miles a day. This was back in the day, and I just when I started running because I had the iPod, and I was like, "Yeah, I can do 5 miles." And then I started thinking, "I should do an Ironman. I could do an Ironman because these are those things you think about when you're running and you're
Yeah.
feeling good, and you're like, "Yeah,
I could do
I
that.
could do that." And I was like, "Well, I bet I could run a marathon tomorrow."
Oh,
So
geez.
then I finished that run, and then the next day I'm like, "I'm gonna run 26 miles. I'm gonna run down to Oceana and back to the house, and that's not gonna be a problem." And I got about 14 miles into it, didn't take anything to drink, didn't take
Oh
anything to eat,
boy.
none of that. And
Wow.
then that's when I hit the wall, when I
Yeah.
was trying to run I felt tired, and I was trying to run across a street
Hmm.
and, you know, through the crosswalk, but I was running and then I just couldn't run anymore. And I was
Hmm.
like, "Oh, this must be the wall they're talking about." And I was like, "Well, I'll just run to finish across the street." And nope, nope, you're
Nope.
not running at all.
Oh no.
You
And your
might
body
be
says
able
you're
to walk.
done.
Yeah, you
Yep.
might be able to walk. So I had to
Hmm.
walk 3 miles after that to get back to the house. But I was like, man, that's and then another time I did that running in Bend, Oregon, because they had this thing where you could run around the city through all the traffic circles and
Hmm.
a piece of paper and you had to answer questions for each traffic circle. Like in
Oh
this
wow.
statue, what kind of animal is at the lumberjack's feet? It's a squirrel,
Mhm.
but it's you have to run out there and see it. So now you're running with a piece of paper and carrying a pencil. And you're supposed to get some sort of prize if you turned in that you went to like 7 or 10 of them out of the
Oh
14 or
wow.
20. So I started running. The map was not to scale and it's a desert. I saw coyotes. The sun was
Yep.
hot. There's dirt. There were lava fields, and I hit the wall about 17 miles into that, and I was close to where we were staying. So I went by the 7-Eleven and got a couple Gatorades and a power bar, and then just tried to get those down while
Hmm.
walking very slowly back to where I started. And then when I turned in that sheet at downtown Bend, the reward was a piece of chocolate.
That doesn't seem worth it.
I was expecting like a challenge coin or maybe a book
Yeah.
about Bend or, a
Something
nice
cool.
map. a certificate would have been better than a chocolate bar. Get out of here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I learned when we lived in Kansas City is where I did most of my marathons, or where I trained for them. And you can either do when you're training, you can either do laps and come by your house every so often, so you can get some fuel and stuff like that. That's one way of doing it. It's also bad from the respect that you're going by your house and it gives you the opportunity to quit and be done. So I did an out and back one day, and it was probably an 18 or 20 mile run. You're kind of getting towards the end of the training period and you got to put in those miles. And I hit that wall probably about mile 15 or something like that. And it's just like you said, my body said, oh, you're done running. You're not going to run anymore, but you still got to get home. And I just cursed myself the whole way back for doing an out and back instead of doing laps that day. Messed that one up.
Yeah. I like a out and back with laps at the end for like the last 5 or 6 miles is how I would do it. But the burn your boats approach is not bad if you're fueling up along the way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it is interesting when you're running and then you take one of those, like the gel squares, or you eat anything that you're like, whoa, I have so much power.
But those gels packs, the goo or whatever, all those things, those are just nasty. But you got to have them during the course of a run. You can't make it without them.
Yeah. All right. So you have that running blog, and that's C Randy Run. C is in SEE.
That's
randyrun.com.
Yep. And that's, like I said, that's been going for 20 years or so.
Okay, cool. I'll put that in the show notes as well. And then you have your other website for your writing, which is crandywrite.com. And I'll put that in the show notes.
Great.
And then I'll also put the link in for that Amazon, the authors page, because that's cool to follow that.
Yeah. Much appreciated.
Any thoughts or ideas in closing?
Well, like I said, I try not to dispense advice, but hopefully people who are listening think, oh, well, if he can do that, I can do that, or I can do something, take that, twist it to work so it works for me. That's what I hope people get. But I think one thing I've learned along the way too is if you feel like you want to write, just do it. There's no one way to do it. Nobody can tell you or make you do it. If you've got it in you, just do it. It sounds like a Nike slogan or something.
Yeah, agreed. I don't think we'll get sued.
Perfect. No, I appreciate it, Ross, talking to you today and everything.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. It's a good conversation. I'll definitely finish your book, and I'll send you, because I have some notes on it already, just what I thought about it. Not like, hey, this is a bad thing, but it's more of the, I like the way this is, and this is a good line, and this is memorable. So I'll send those to you.
That'd be great. Cool.
And if you need somebody to read anything on a draft purposes or whatever and give some feedback, let me know. I'm pretty honest.
Yeah. Well, that'd be great. Yeah. And hopefully we can talk again another time. Enjoyed.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. All right. I'll talk to you on the other side of this.
All right. Thanks.
Yep.